It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, March 19th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is wondering what an 84 game season might look like.
I think it's 2 games more. Oh, you mean more than that? Okay.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. I've been podcasting about the Flyers, the NHL, and hockey for a decade. I'm here with prospect expert and Flyers credentialed reporter for 19 years, Russ Cohen. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. To keep up with our latest episodes and Flyers news, you can find us at Locked On Flyers on all your favorite socials and, of course, here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Y'all have some excellent mailbag questions. There's some on the goaltending, Tyson Foerster, drafting, so much good stuff. We're going to get to that later in the show. And we're going to discuss the GM meeting so far and this proposed 84 game regular season. We do need to acknowledge the official announcement from the Flyers that Bob Kelly is retiring, which sounds a little weird just because obviously he hasn't played for a very long time here. But I think that it is important because he was such a huge part of the team. So Bob Kelly has been a fixture in the team community fan relations area for quite some time now and has just been like a staple. And I can speak to at least, for me, we had a birthday party for my mother. I believe it was her 60th birthday, where we got a suite and had like 20 people there. And Bob Kelly comes up to the suite and shakes everybody's hand, takes pictures. My mom got an autographed hat, like with his signature on it. It was really cool. And I think that it's kind of like the end of an era here in a
Yeah.
lot of ways with him being around the rink all the time.
Yeah, he's one of the guys that, he's kind of like you open the doors to the place and he's there waiting for you. Nice guy. He's always giving out the jersey to all the special guests or, honored guests.
Right.
Yeah. But he's a great player too. Uh, in my book for game winners in the top 50 goals, he's got a goal in there. I'm not going to say where, but he does. And so that's another thing because I made sure he was in there because I kind of remembered that goal. And yeah,
Right.
he's an important guy in Flyers history. He's just not like Bobby Clark level, but
Right.
he's been the glue from that era to now, honestly, because he's always there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I just don't remember being there and not seeing him.
Right.
It's
That'll be
it
weird.
is it is a big deal. Yeah, they're gonna honor him on March 29th during the Flyers game against the Sabres. Should be excellent. Very much looking forward to seeing that because I know the video that they put together is gonna be a tearjerker,
Oh
whatever
yeah.
it is.
Yeah,
Like
it'll
you're
be
gonna
sad.
laugh,
Yeah.
you're gonna cry when it comes to Bob Kelly. He's a funny guy too. So moving over to what's going on with the GM meetings and, potential changes to the schedule here. First off, I think what they've been doing at the GM meetings this time around is really interesting because they're looking at the accuracy and effectiveness of coaches' challenges.
Mhm.
And they've put the GMs through the exercise of actually reacting to a play and seeing how the challenge process works,
Okay.
where they're seeing like video clips. They're going to assess whether or not the penalty should be overturned or the goal should be overturned. They're using goalie interference videos as an
Oh
example.
boy.
So I know, I know. And so there's the people from the officials organization. They're working with the league to kind of educate GMs a little bit more about the process so they can bring it back to their teams and make sure that the coaching staffs really understand, how it works and where the logic comes in or doesn't come in. And then they can more effectively decide whether or not to do these challenges in the first place. And if the GMs really want to fight on any of these particular rules and make rule changes because they think challenges aren't effective at this point.
Yeah, I think the challenges will stay. I think the next level part of this that they may not be doing is, so you're a team, Team X. You had a challenge, you failed, you already gave up power play. Your guy in the back on the next challengeable thing says, "Hey, I don't think that was a goal." And the coach is like, "You know what? We just got burned on that one. It's I don't need to get burned again early in this game and go down 2-0. We just gave up a goal on the last one." That kind of context is how it affects the game is important too, because sometimes coaches pass on the coach's challenge because of that,
Yeah.
because they don't want to even take the risk, because even though your guy's telling you one thing, it's still up to the other guys looking at it, right? So I think that's what makes it kind of hard. What they're doing is good just to see on a call on a, flat line basis, sure, but it's when you get deeper into the game, it gets tricky.
Well, and that's why hopefully this getting into the weeds of it on the GM side of things will at least help the overall
Yeah,
process. And, you look at the Flyers, and John Tortorella is very famous for not challenging unless he's going to win, right?
right.
And he lost
He
the
lost.
other day.
Yep.
And that was very unusual, but
Yep.
I thought it was very telling too in terms of the process
Yeah.
overall. So I like it. I like that that's what they're
Me
doing
too.
for sure. Now, talking about the schedule, there have been rumblings going on for quite some time, and Pierre LeBrun posted an article specifically about it, about looking at the schedule for next year and then the year after that moving forward. Now, next year is baked, right, in terms of what the structure of the schedule
Right.
is going to be. They already know that the regular season is going to start October 7th, and the latest it could go is like the third week of June,
Right.
which is pretty much similar to this year because instead of the Four
Yes.
Nations break, there's the Olympic break,
Right.
right, which is a little bit longer. And so that crunches the time on either end a
Yep.
little bit more. And so the crazy schedule with all the back to backs and the 3 games in 4 days, that's going to happen again next year.
It doesn't have to if they cut out more preseason games, but they don't want to give up that revenue. That's the
But
problem.
they can't get out of that for next year. Like,
I mean, you could.
the ink is no, they can't, because that's what has been agreed to, and season ticket
Oh, I know, but
sales and all of
I
that
think
stuff.
yes. I mean, it's anticipated revenue.
Right, but so it's impossible for next year. Now, the thing that's the sticking point for next year that has also been floated out there is that they have scheduled an all-star game next year
Right.
to be hosted by the New York Islanders, and it was supposed to be this send-off, right, to the Olympics, but given how they decided this before Four Nations, and once
Right.
they saw how Four Nations went and how successful it was and how great the hockey was, like, the thought of going to an all-star game this year in addition to the Olympics just seems like out of touch, right?
Well, I mean, the players are going to say that, but the league does a lot of corporate business at the All-Star game. So it's like this is one of those things where, as an example, if the league acquiesces and says, "Okay, players, no All-Star game next year, whatever," when they start really negotiating for that CBA, that All-Star game is back in play now. And they're going to say, "We gave it to you on this occasion so you could play in the Olympics, and we don't like when you play in the Olympics." And then that could cause friction in the next CBA. So they may do this, but it also then may become a stumbling block later on.
It could, and I'm not saying it's gonna happen,
Right.
or that it's even a remote possibility that's gonna happen, but there's certainly been talk about
Oh,
it
they're talking
because,
about it.
yeah, I think it's a more than zero
Oh, I
possibility that
agree. No, there's
that
a chance.
they're gonna cancel this all-star game, and they're gonna figure out something to a bone to throw the Islanders in order to make up for it, but
Right.
because of all this, there's a lot of uncertainty about the schedule, and so we may not get the schedule until later in the
I
summer
can
than we
see that.
normally would.
Yeah.
So, just throwing that out there for
Well, at least this
people
time it won't be
there.
about a team moving or going bankrupt or anything.
Well, I guess there is that upside, right? But, given all that, I also think it's really, really bad for next season to have more back-to-backs and more 3 games in 4 days than the schedule. I mean, we've seen how brutal it's been in terms of, wear and tear on the players and all of that. I think, you make that sacrifice 1 year for the Olympics, and then
Right.
you gotta spread the schedule out again. But to have done it this year for 4 nations and next year for the Olympic, that's gonna be really tough on the players.
Yeah, my prediction on that is if it happens that way and there are more back-to-backs, we will start to see load management in the NHL. We're going to see it. I don't think there'll
But
be
we
any way
should.
around it. Yeah,
Yeah, I and
we
it's
say that.
very
We say that because Sean Couturier, like a Flyers fan, if he shows up and Sean Couturier is not in there, no big deal. But if you go see the one game against the Edmonton Oilers that Connor McDavid's supposed to play in and he doesn't play, it's a big deal. That's the only thing about load management. That's the negative side of it.
It absolutely is, and I think, it's very antithetical to the hockey culture to have
Yes,
load management,
I
so
know.
that is gonna be a stumbling block as well, but all of this, to your point with the CBA, affects the following year, which is the linchpin of all of this,
Yep.
and we are gonna talk about that coming up next. There is nothing like watching women's basketball live. The energy of the crowd, the sound of sneakers on the hardwood, it's all incredible, whether it's college, unrivaled, or the WNBA. If you want to catch a game in person, Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks even highlights super deals, giving you the best bang for your buck. And with seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
Ever check your bank account and wonder where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You could track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you could just stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you could just use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And you'll find things you never knew about your spending habits. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year.
All right. So 2026-27 season is where the rubber meets the road here for a potential schedules change. To your point, Russ, that's when the CBA extension talks are going to be in full
Yep.
swing. So one new idea, which is what like the crux of this Pierre LeBrun article that I mentioned was talking about, is starting the season in late September, but you still end the season in that third week in June that we talked about. And then that allows for a longer break for a, World Cup, Four Nations, Olympics like object, right? And then
Okay.
you have an 84 game regular season, which is 2 games more than you would regularly have. And then I think then you would limit the preseason to probably 4 games. Right now it's 6 or 7. So if you cut that down to 4 games, add the 2 regular season games, it's essentially the same number of games as you had before, with 2 more of them being regular season than they were before. And there's a breakdown here in terms of how that would work out in
Right.
terms of the math about who you would play, which I can get into. But from a big picture perspective, like, what are your thoughts on that option?
I mean, big picture, it balances the schedule a little more. I like the fewer preseason games. That's fine. Don't like the fact that if you're doing all this, it still needs to run to late June. I think you should be able to move up this timeline at least a week or two from any other season. It shouldn't be late June. It should be like the latest cup game could be, like, I don't know, June 5th. And by the second week of June, the draft's over. And then you have your camp, and then players have a longer time off. But that all
The
depends on.
Olympic break is longer than the
I
Four
know,
Nations break was,
I
though. That's
know.
the problem.
That's the problem, unless you start earlier.
Right.
But
And that's what they're hoping, that if you start the last week of September, that's 2 weeks earlier. And so that is an extra 2 or 3 weeks earlier depending on the
yeah,
team, right? And that allows you to stretch out the regular season so you don't have that crunch with all the wear and tear that we're talking
yeah, I
about.
guess that's fine. I mean, I'm nitpicking probably, so yeah, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah. So, really, what it looks like is that you have 28 of those 84 games would be your in division opponents. You'd have 4 games against each of them, 2 home and 2 on the road. That sounds fine by me. Then
Hmm.
for the other division in your conference, 3 games each,
Right,
either 1 or 2 at home, depending, would probably alternate year to year on that. So that's 24 games. So you have 28 and 24. Then you have your usual 2 games against everybody in the other conference,
right.
1 at home and 1 on the road. And all of that seems pretty reasonable to me.
It does. Actually, it does seem reasonable. Here's always been the complaints about the schedule. We're playing, the in division teams too much. And I heard that for a bunch of years when I first started. So then they got away from it. And then all of a sudden the loser point comes in and it's like, you're not playing the teams in your division enough. Well, why are you not playing them enough? Because those are the only teams you could catch for the playoffs most of the time. Because if it's somebody else and you're not playing them enough, it's very hard to catch up, like those last 10 games, let's say. So it's a
Right.
fine, it cuts both ways. So I'm fine with it. I don't think there's an ideal way either way because of that dynamic. Like I think in the end, you still want to play your division a certain amount of times because you may get sick of a team, sure, when they're not that great, but in the end, that's the one that you care about more than most of the
Right.
other teams.
Right. And so I think that, having rivalries is essential
Right.
to the sport. And I
Yes.
think, I mean, it's essential to pretty much every team sport, right? And that's why
Yes.
you have divisions, right?
Right. Right.
So that
Otherwise, you
you
wouldn't even
can,
bother.
right, right. You would just have
Once
like
to
Premier League.
32 and just, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, you look at Premier League in England, it's just one single table and that's it, right? So I do think there's a function to having divisions, and you have to maintain that, and it
Yeah.
helps with geography and travel costs and all of that,
Definitely.
right? So there is a financial implication as well if you're going to limit the number of in division games here. But I don't think this changes things fundamentally enough that it would
No.
cause a problem there. Now, there has been some talk on occasion about maybe changing the formula and saying, well, maybe we don't have to play every team, or the other conference, we only play them once and it alternates between home and road. And I don't love that, specifically because, there are teams that need to sell the Connor McDavid game, for
Right.
instance,
Right.
right? And wanna have things along the season to do that with, and so if you don't get Connor McDavid, at your arena that whole year, like, that's rough.
It is. Yeah. I think that's, yeah, I think this will work. I think this will work, and then they'll collectively bargain it. And what'll screw it up is when they have two new teams coming in like 3, 4 years
And have to start all over
and have to
again,
start all
right?
over again. That's what's going to happen. Like it's just going to happen, folks.
Yeah, I do think that this structure and reducing the preseason games is the only
Yeah.
thing that would make it, for me at least, to say it's okay to up the number of regular season
Right.
games by 2. That's the only way. You gotta, like, it has to come out in the wash somehow. But the Flyers having 7 preseason games,
Too
like, that
much.
was ludicrous.
It
Like,
was.
nobody needs that many games. Now,
No.
if you have like a rookie series kind of game and you don't count that as your preseason games, and in addition, that's okay too,
Well,
right?
interestingly enough, for all the people that always say, well, the NHL is never innovative and they never do anything, baseball just copied the NHL having all these rookie games for
Yeah,
baseball. They made sure they had like, I don't know, like 10 of them, something like that. They've never done that before. See, gee, where'd they get out that idea from?
I know. Copying hockey, that is new and exciting. But yeah, so I like it. And I think that it would help. is immensely by spreading out the games a
Yeah,
little bit. And especially even for fans, like have to go to that many games in a short time span is a tough commitment to make.
it is. No, it's hard. I mean, especially you're working. It's like I got to go to 4 games this week. Like that's hard.
Right. Right. So I do think it makes it easier for the fans as well. But love to hear your thoughts out there about this, whether it's from a Flyers perspective or just a NHL perspective in general. We thought it was just a really interesting thing that would affect everybody.
Yep.
But let us know what you think about this potential schedule change, and maybe we'll talk about it in our mailbag, just like we have our mailbag segment coming up next.
Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, design, and more, experts ready to take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. Posting a job is free and simple. I did it. I posted a job for what is now NHLDraftBuzz.com. Did it last April, had 3 candidates, and in a short amount of time, I pared it down. And before you knew it, I had a website. They went every step of the way with me, and I was very happy and wrote a nice review at the end. So and I told just somebody recently, go use them because they're starting a website. And instead of hiring full time, Upwork helps find affordable top tier freelancers to scale my business efficiently. Visit upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, digging into our mailbag here. I think that there's some really interesting thoughts and big questions about Flyers goaltending. And
Yeah.
we had a couple of comments here on Fedotov versus Ersson here that I think kind of roll up the opinions into that question. So Mr. Flyers Freak said Fedotov should be playing 60% of the time from here on out. Sammy is nothing more than a backup. He should be treated as such. Fetty has the stats and the accolades to back him up. Let him play. Mark Fisher said Fedotov has been playing very well the last 6 or 7 games. He could be the number 1 goalie if the coach gave him some more ice time. So neither one of these commenters are going to bat for Sam Ersson.
No.
Is what I'm seeing.
Right. Look, I think for the rest of this season, to have him as a tandem is fine. I don't think it's going to matter that much either way. If you played Fedotov one more game, that's fine. But why start a controversy in the season when the season's almost over? So I think just let it kind of roll as a 50-50 split the rest of the way. If Fedotov looks better, then you know what? It'll be up to John or whoever that next coach is to kind of make that decision. But most likely those are your 2 guys back next year, and they'll figure it out. Like at some point, if they are loyal to Sam Ersson and he doesn't look good early in the season, they'll give the job to Fedotov. But I do tend to agree with everybody that right now Fedotov does look like he's got a little bit more going for him than Sam does. And Sam had every opportunity and had all the benefits for a while.
Right. And I mean, I think that with Fedotov, like we've seen him get better and better the more ice time
Right.
that he's gotten. We talked about that on yesterday's show, in the recap of the Tampa Bay Lightning game from Monday night, right? So that's a part of it. And the thing about Ersson to me is that the thing about him is that people have always said he's able to brush off a bad game or a bad goal really easily. We haven't seen that as much
Right.
recently as we had, I would say, the first half of the season, last season in its entirety. And that is the big difference for me in terms of what we've seen from Ersson in the past. And now that makes me think that Fedotov should be getting more games.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Tuddy T commented related to this goalie conversation, but also talking about block shots,
I mean,
which
it wouldn't be
we
a Flyer show without a goalie conversation, right? So
right,
let's go.
right. So this person said on the Canes game and related to this block shots conversation that we had, block shots also show how little a team has the puck, which is true. We mentioned that specifically, but also says, shouldn't the goalie position be low on the rebuild list of priorities?
No, because in the end, we always say, like, you could have a great team and not have the right goalie, and you're not going to win the Stanley Cup. And so far, the Carolina Hurricanes would be the team that would exemplify that. And whether you liked what went on or not, you could also say that the Flyers are not in as good a shape as when they had Carter Hart. So I think that is more proof than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And there's also the issue of you have to do everything. Like you
Yeah,
need all of these things.
you do.
And so sometimes, even though for the Flyers, let's say your top priority is that 1C, but what if the right goaltending situation comes up for you ahead of that? Sometimes you just have to jump on what's in front of you,
Right.
right?
That's true.
Yeah, so to me, you have to take advantage of the situation as it presents itself, not and you have a bunch of priorities and you figure it out as you go. But also, that's why I'm not a GM and I don't want to ever have to make these big decisions like that. I just like talking about them here. Chris Olivo said right now the Flyers would get the number 6 pick if the season ended today. If by chance they can get that 1C in the top 3 and still have 6 picks in the first 2 rounds, along with all that cap space, Briere can make some noise this summer. They're years away from competing, but the first 2 years of the rebuild are irrelevant as the goal is to stockpile picks, draft high, and clear cap space. Year 3 is when it begins. So to me, this is saying, Russ, what year are we actually in with Briere, and is next year year 3, and are we exactly where we should be?
I guess next year's year 3. I mean, I would argue not exactly where you should be, only because of some drafting decisions that might impact the future. But as far as like what we can see, yeah, I think they're pretty close to what they should be. I think that this offseason, you'll see a little bit more. I think they have to, like we've talked about, pare down some contracts and have more cap space even than they have now. And they have to have more player development. Like there's been some, but there hasn't been enough. And so I think all of those things matter. And I think as far as the draft part, you can go on Nasty Knuckles. Mark Gregg was on there, and he kind of hedged about calling anybody a guaranteed 1C. I think, Hagen's is the closest to that, but I understand where Mark's coming from. And so you could go through this whole draft. I might not get that guaranteed 1C in the end. Like that's sometimes the way it shakes out. That's the tricky part of it. So do I think a team needs to be in the top 5 to have that chance? Yeah, I do. And they, just because they end up in 6 now doesn't mean they won't end up in like that number 3, 2 or 3 spot or 1 spot, because they can, that first 11 has a shot at it, or the number 8 spot because they're unlucky. Like that happens too. So
Yeah.
we're not there
Yeah.
yet. They're not, we can't really predict it yet.
Yeah, and I just get very hesitant to bank on moving up in the draft because I just feel like that luck almost never happens to the
Right.
Flyers. So, you kind of have to assume the worst going
Yeah, I
into
think that's
it
the best
until
way
you
to do
know,
it. Right.
right?
I think that's the best way to do it.
Right. But that being said, I do think that next year is year 3 and the
hmm
change has to happen starting next year. And I'd say even this offseason is still getting the ducks in the row a little bit.
I think though, as far as what they do in development camp and those other things for player development, and also, rookie camp and those things, I think it has to change a little too. I think it has to progress.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I'm just saying as far as
Yes.
like the permanent roster
No,
and
absolutely.
what they're
Yeah,
doing, there's still work to be done this off
I
season
agree.
for sure. Joseph DeAngelis has a good comment about Tyson Foerster, saying, the one concern I have with Foerster ever since I watched him play after the Flyers drafted him was that he had a great shot but didn't use it enough. when I dug in further, I could understand why he doesn't seem to be able to create space for him to use that shot. Currently, Forrester is sixth on the team in shots, about 50 less shots than Travis Konechny, Mitchkov, and Tippett, even though Forrester is playing the same number of minutes. If Forrester created that space and had a decent center to feed him the puck, he might lead the team in goals scored.
Well, I mean, I thought in the preseason he would lead the team in goals scored. He hasn't. You had a good point of playing with Brink, that Brink's going to take more shots, so it's going to take shots away from him. He hasn't taken
Yeah,
enough
on
shots
that Cates line,
on
like
that
the
case
way it's
line,
currently
the way it's
constructed.
currently constructed. Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
it's
there's
designed for
something.
Brink and Cates to take the majority
Right.
of the
So you're
shots.
seeing an uptick in Brink, and you're not seeing that uptick in Forster, and he's not getting enough assists because he's just not enough of an assist guy. Cates is getting the benefit of that, and this is kind of how you know Forster's on the wrong line, because he needs to be the bigger shot producer on his line. Doesn't matter which line it is, even if it's the third line. Who cares? You're basically he needs to shoot more. So however you're going to do that, that's how you should do it.
Right, and that's kind of the unfortunate byproduct of that Cates line, and I know they've broken it up a little bit
Yeah.
recently to try and get Konechny going,
Right.
but that being said, that line worked really well, but it doesn't use Tyson Foerster to the
Correct.
best of his ability and his individual skill. So they decided that the sum total of what that line could do was better than breaking off Tyson Foerster to get the best out of him as an individual. And that's certainly a choice that you can make, but it does affect Tyson Foerster's stats here.
Yeah, I mean, the lack of center depth does hurt everybody, and that's why I was against trading Frost. But we moved on from that. But the point of this is, you're basically we're saying the same thing about Owen Tippett. Like, he's not producing enough. So you got two of your bigger guys for the future not producing enough. Like, that's should tell you that things have to change.
Right. And it's very interesting because if you look at scoring chance rates, like so per 60 as opposed to just the totals, Tyson Forster is still one of the top guys on the team. The
Yeah,
problem is the team is bad overall relative
right,
to the rest of the league because Owen Tippett has the highest scoring chances per 60 at 9, which still isn't great for a
right,
per 60 rate, and Forster's at 7.51. So,
right.
it's all relative on the Flyers to the rest of the league, but Forster's still taking a decent number of chances. It
Just not
it's
enough.
just not ideal for
Right.
him. Wrapping things up with Brendan, who wants to know, is there a best practice for long-term planning for the draft and prospect development? For example, do you start looking into next year's draft pool now? How long of a scouting book do you try to keep on prospects?
Oh, I mean, I do it 2.5 years in advance. But like, if you ask me next year's draft, I always say I'm not telling you, because I never want to take away from the guys. But all the scouts know drafts 3 years, 4 years down the line. That's never the problem. The problem is the planning of it, what your strategy is. And sometimes they can't predict all that long term because of changes. Changes, a lot of times draft scouts contracts are year to year. So all of a sudden you change scouting philosophies and things change. We saw that happen with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Uh, so where Kyle Dubas essentially did the draft one year because Mark Hunter was out, right? And that changes things drastically. Like, they didn't even use a lot of the scouting work, I was told, from that year. So those things happen. So it sounds nice to have all this long-term planning, but it's really hard to do it. But like, trust me, scouts could tell you how the top 15 is going to go for next year's draft now.
Yeah, I believe that. I absolutely believe that. But I also believe, to your point, that people try and not talk about the future years as much
Right.
just because it's harder to predict. And
It is.
there's like this cone of predictability that as we get closer to a draft year,
Yeah.
like then you can be more definitive about it.
Right.
But you gotta start watching these guys, when they're 16 years old
They watch
at
them when they're
minimum.
15. They
At
do.
minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless somebody pops, in their U16 or
Right.
U17 year that they weren't aware of before. But it is a fascinating process for sure. We're going to talk more about it as we get closer to the draft. And speaking of which, Russ had his new rankings for March released recently on NHLDraftBuzz.com. We're going to look at that and who may have moved up or down since the last one, as well as do an in-depth profile of Anton Frundell and Victor Eklund, who both play for the same team in Sweden and are pretty close to each other in the rankings
They are.
for the upcoming draft, which is really interesting. So stay tuned for that. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got questions for us about the draft or the Flyers or anything else, let us know on any of our socials at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment on our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology on the same socials, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast. It brings you daily league-wide stories that matter with local coverage you love from Locked On. I am on the show each and every Friday, as well as on Saturday for the Women's Hockey Report. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.